Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Christoph Defoe.
And I'm Sean Prophet.
Today we're going to talk to you about a Netflix docudrama really, called The Social Dilemma. It's getting really popular. My friend Tim recommended it. Tim always gets a big shout out from us because he is the guy who does all our artwork for the show, and he is just fantastic. We're also going to talk to you about a CNN opinion piece that gets at the sort of political and social divide that is plaguing in America and is also related to that docudrama and the social dilemma. And then we're going to get into our more sort of broader topics. We're going to talk to you about recovering from republicanism. Fascinating. We're going to also talk to you about something called functional/rational libertarianism. Also fascinating. We're going to talk to you about, from a psychological perspective, we're going to talk about the cognitive biases that we all deal with, self-interest and self-actualization. And we're going to talk to you about addiction, treatment, and Alcoholics Anonymous. And to help us talk about all that today, we have a guest, and she's a PhD candidate in human and organizational psychology at Touro University. I'm just going to straight up read this now. She holds a Master of Social Work from Fordham University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Rutgers University. Among other roles, she's a founder and managing clinical director of her own psychotherapy practice, and she's a program director of 2 residential substance abuse treatment facilities. She's also a Manhattan resident, recovering Republican, devoted wife, stepmom, pet parent, and Marvel comics enthusiast. We are pleased to welcome Margaret Walker to the Radical Secular.
So happy to be here.
Awesome. And she actually goes by Meg, I guess. So we'll call her Meg. We're really happy to have you here, Meg. Thanks for being here. But before we get into the show, I want to remind everybody out there to make sure that you subscribe to this channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that big red button. You can also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe there. And look, if you like the show and you want to, and if you consider yourself to be radically secular, you should give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends and your family. Word of mouth really matters. Also, I want to plug the Just Word Fallacy Medium publication. It is a narrative companion to the Radical Secular, where we publish weekly articles from progressive, diverse authors related to politics, religion, justice, the sort of things that we talk about on the show, but with perhaps a wider purview. The link is in the show notes. And if you're interested in publishing your work on the Just Words Fallacy, here's our contact info.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at Radical Secular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Now, let's get into the shirts. This is going to be an interesting topic, a little bit different this week, but not from me. I'm wearing a shirt that I got also from No Gods, No Masters, like I did last week, and it is like the Jesus fish turned into a rocket ship, and it says science because we love science on this show. And also, we're going to talk about psychology today, which is a science. No? Okay, there it is. And all right, Sean, how about you?
Well, I think you must have read my mind because look what I have on my shirt today.
Nice.
Ah, that's fantastic.
Beautiful.
It says, Hail Sagan, and of course, Carl Sagan. If there were a patron saint of science, he would be it, but we don't believe in saints, so... but we can appropriate religious metaphor whenever we feel like it because that's what we do here on the Radical Secular. We make our own rules.
That's right. That's what we're all about here. We are radically secular. Also, all right. So now Meg is going to go, and this is going to be a little bit of a twist on how we usually do this.
All right, so I actually don't wear T-shirts. I also don't wear any branded clothing either, and it's by design. I actively hate labels, and I don't like people making assumptions about me. And I know that basically how we present ourselves to the world tells people how to perceive us. And so in order to avoid that and allow myself to be seen as exactly who I am, I don't wear any T-shirts and I don't wear anything that has any sort of logo on it.
I think, yeah, see, like I told you, Sean, that there's a reason behind it. It's legit. It's legit.
Didn't Naomi Klein write a book called No Logo?
Perhaps.
I'm not even sure.
I'm not sure if I have the author right, but I know there's a book called No Logo, and it's basically anti-corporatist, kind of making that same point about people, falling into these identities, corporate identities, and giving their, lending themselves and their personality to support, basically do unpaid advertising for some corporate.
Yeah, that was the second part. Is you pay me to advertise.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I do this on my car. I always, one of the things that I notice is I'm driving around and everyone, their license plate frame is always 99% of the time is just where they bought the car. So you're driving around advertising like, Joe Schmo's BMW or whatever. And I'm like, why not spend $10 and even just get a black one? Right. I mean, right. Mine actually says Black Lives Matter on it. But you don't, I got that was custom made, but you don't have to do that. That cost me, by the way, like $25. It wasn't like it was like a fortune. But you get one for fucking $10, right? And just slap it on there. And you're not walking around like sort of advertising Saturns or whatever, When I
was living in Jersey, they were actually illegal. Those were the faux tickets you'd get when they pull you over and not want to give you a ticket for speeding.
Ah, yes.
Blocking your license plate.
Oh, interesting.
Fucking fascists.
At the very least you could do is just take the dealer license plate frame off entirely. That's the first thing to do,
Exactly. Just take it off, right? I mean,
as soon as my tags come from the state, right, I got to go out there and put that on. So I'm going to take that dealer plate right off at that point,
Exactly.
People often, because I am very much this way, they're like, are you really angry at a lot of stuff? I'm like, I'm actually not. I just don't like to be forced to do things that I haven't been asked to do.
You fit in really well here because Sean is forever being talking about and correctly talking about the sort of tone policing out there on the internets, right? Because he and I are, and admittedly, we have a hard edge because we're really passionate about this. And frankly, sometimes if you want to rattle the cage and get people to actually pay attention to issues that are very serious, that's why we say defund the police, right? Because it's like, right, it gets people's attention. That's half of the point. And so, we're big on not tone policing here. And speaking of which, I think, and segue is, and talk about libertarianism and republicanism, right? There is no more tone policing than A, the Republican right, and then B, the liberal left, frankly, right, is really big on the tone policing as well. So you really get that from both ends. But for the purpose of our discussion here, because we have Meg here, and because actually Sean and I are both people who grew up in conservative environments ourselves, I think it's a really apt time to talk about this sort of recovering from republicanism. And I really am interested to hear, Meg, this idea of functional libertarianism. Like, what do you mean by that? But we can get into that. But go ahead. Kick it off.
I'm an odd bird. So I was raised, super, super conservative. My family was here pre-Mayflower, like we were Dutch fur traders. So we've been here forever. We're like the bluest of the blood, right? And of course, that means we are Protestant, Episcopal, and Republican. It was a cultural part of my life. It had very little to do with me actually thinking about it. And when I went to Rutgers, I was introduced frequently as, this is Meg, my Republican friend.
That's good.
So what that really did, it was a trial by fire. I really had to hone why I supported this party, who I was, why I supported it, my positions on certain issues. And as I said earlier, I actually worked for the GOP. But when I worked for the GOP, I worked for the Republican Pro-Choice Coalition. So my position in the Republican Party had always been maximize personal freedom. Keep your laws away from me as much as possible, right? I understand everybody. That's how I transitioned into libertarianism. When the Republican Party, it became clear they had no beliefs anymore. There was no political position. This was a moral kind of they come from a place of morality. And that's not who I am. I'm an atheist, right? I'm an atheist. So the whole, all the religious rights stuff, slowly, like Southern strategy, just all these things, I couldn't make excuses anymore. I had just moved to Manhattan when I changed my party affiliation. And I remembered when I landed here, I actually got a congratulatory letter from the Republican Party. Like, you are so courageous. Look at you moving to New York City and saying you're.
Oh, man. That's wild.
Going into the urban jungle, you know.
Oh, boy. Oh, God.
Right? Where they're gonna consume me, which is kind of what we have going on right now in media. Neither here nor there. But so the same thinking kept applying, right? I kept thinking to myself, I want, and I don't think anyone would argue against this, we all want as much freedom as we can possibly get, right? And so that means in almost all metrics, when you measure it, I'm a libertarian. But then I started thinking about libertarianism. And a friend of mine is actually a founder of the Free State Project. Are you familiar with this?
No,
I'm not.
Okay, in New Hampshire, he happens to be a very successful tech entrepreneur who got out of a really good deal, very young, and had lots of money to burn. And his passion was libertarianism. So he bought a massive plot of land in New Hampshire, which was to become a libertarian utopia. And there are thousands of people living there right now. And it's called the Free State Project. And this is where my shift started. I remember having a conversation with him about this. And he's like, well, why don't you just, come join, like, we can all move to an island. No laws, no rules. I'm like, cool. I want to corner all of the water, and it's all going to be mine, and you guys are going to have to do whatever I want in order to get water to survive. That is the end point of libertarianism.
Yes,
no question about it. We
music
agree.
Music to our ears. Yes, that is the inevitable endpoint. You can't. And that is just a logical conclusion.
And where there's water coming in, there's sewage going out, right? So you can obviously dump your sewage on anybody's property because, we're all free to do whatever we want.
Yeah, you have to accept what humanity is, right? And communism does not accept what humanity is. Libertarianism, any sort of fundamentalist belief, the extremes, human beings are selfish and self-centered. And if they are not working their entire lives to be less selfish and self-centered, then they create what we have right now, right? The cultural climate we're in right now all springs from this. So my rational libertarianism came from thinking about, I still want maximum freedom, so long as it does not impinge on the freedom of others. What is freedom? Is healthcare freedom? Are you free if you don't have healthcare? Are you free if you don't have an education? Are you free if you can't get down your road because nobody's plowed it, or the garbage is piled up and you have rats infesting, your entire house? So my concept of freedom evolved because the position is purely theoretical. And when you come from a purely theoretical standpoint, it never bears much resemblance to the reality of it.
Wow, I really wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what you said, because my own fault that we skipped over the sort of CNN opinion piece, because I think that really dovetails really well with what you're talking about here, because you're talking about libertarianism, and we agree, incidentally, as a conceptual idea, right? So like it's about freedom, but in this sort of pure non-practical sense, in this sort of just abstract sense, right? And that is, I think Sean will agree with this, and with some different thoughts, but that is one of the biggest problems, deontological sort of perspective. What you tend to get from the extremes, but certainly from the extreme right, is this idea that individual rights matter more than practical outcomes, right? Sort of these sort of broad ideas. And so what you end up with is we have a bunch of people like, I mean, I'm a functional guy, right? I care about what I think and what I say. I care about how that impacts actual people's lives, right? Actual people's lives. And we are divided in this country, I think. In a large part, that divide can be made along those lines, right? It could be made along the people who think about things functionally and people who think about things sort of in these abstract terms.
Of thinking of things functionally, right? Like they have distance. My parents are a great example of this, right? Their daughter works with the poorest of the poor, right? Where mothers have their children pulled from their homes for the most minor issue, right? And where the system re-traumatizes these people over and over again. It's horrific. I spend all day long working to kind of help the community. She still does not believe that these things happen. When I tell her that women of color are disenfranchised from their own motherhood at rates you can't possibly imagine, she's like, no.
Well,
yes. If you will come in and take your child, if you tested positive for cannabis.
Yeah. I want to bring up something.
Only if you're a woman of color.
Exactly.
I want to bring up something philosophically that I think underpins all of this. Well, number one, of course, it's the "Till It Happens to You," that Lady Gaga song, which is really great. That is really the disconnect that happens with many people who are, disconnected from this. But it's a larger issue. If you really want to piss off a right libertarian, just bring up the tragedy of the commons or utilitarianism in general. Okay, and where there has to be some account. The trolley problem. We talk about that all the time. But yeah, it's the tragedy of the commons, where everything is interrelated. Your use of water or your dumping of sewage, or it gets right even down into what you're talking about in terms of social work, where you're working with these disadvantaged families and mothers and children and things like that. They are disadvantaged because of policies that the people like your mom benefit from, for example.
And biases, right? In my own personal life, we have brought my stepson's mom to court for assaulting her boyfriend in front of the child, for leaving the child for 8 or more hours a day alone. Either of those would have had the child removed immediately out of the mother's care where I work. That would have happened instantly. She's tiny, she's white.
Exactly. We talk about this sort of these double standards that we have, right? I mean, this is what white privilege is. This is what structural racism is that there is two sets of rules. And in fact, maybe not even two. There's multiple sets of rules because there's also how much money you have. You get your own sets of rules. Even if you're white, you get better, you get worse rules than the rich people who are white, right? Even there, right? So, and I think again, and I read this. We read this article earlier today, and he really talks about in the article, the CNN article, about this sort of ideological divide. Yes, in America, but I think what we're talking about here really drills down to what that means as a practical matter, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm in a unique perspective, right? Like I was raised by millionaires. I'm the whitest human being ever. But I chose to go into a field because I had the luxury of being able to make that choice, that I'm not ever going to make money. I have tons of education that wasn't cheap, right? So I chose to go into this. So I see each different level of it. I mean, all of my employees are required to have master's degrees. The maximum salary the state will allow me to pay them is $60,000 a year.
Wow. Just it's just like madness. What behavior do we as a society, as a culture, sort of value and reward, right? And this gets into the charity issue that we talked a little bit in the beginning of before we started talking here before we started recording, is that, right, you have this idea that, and this gets interestingly into our hierarchy discussion that we have all the time on this show, right? And I should probably just let you handle it. Sean, go ahead.
Well, this is the point, is that, we sort of assume, and this is in this article, it talks about this, that we assume that if the other side just had the information, if they just knew these things that were going on, that they would obviously change their minds. But that's not the case at all. What's going on is that, teachers, social workers, and, the helping professions, psychologists, all of these things, these are people who will help those who are on the lower rungs of the ladder rise. And the Republicans do not want that. This is a cult of hierarchy, and is a cult of feudalism, and those who are on top do not want to see those at the bottom benefit. So, for example, putting people in a double bind situation where their student loans are barely going to be covered by their salary, that's exactly the kind of double bind.
Get rid of loan forgiveness.
Yeah.
Which is what.
So you trap these people these are the people we should be supporting. We should be paying teachers and social workers $100,000 plus. Okay,
exactly.
Especially if you require a PhD. I mean, come on, So
if you're looking for good outcomes, right?
Yeah, but they're not.
To solve these problems, you need talented people.
Yeah, they don't want them solved. And that's
the bottom line, Sean. That's the bottom line, that they don't want the problem solved. They're not interested in that.
But it's so expensive. The trillions of dollars we lose as a result of addiction on an almost annual basis. Trillions of dollars in lost revenue from employers, from accidents, from jail, from treatment, you name it, $1 trillion.
And we talked about this last week too, which is basically like this sort of opportunity cost that's lost, right? Because these people growing up in these environments where they don't have the opportunity or the resources, right? This could be the next brilliant X or the next brilliant Y, right? And we don't know that because these people are not able to self-actualize, which is an interesting conversation that we're going to talk about later, but they're not able to self-actualize because they do not have their base needs met. And what's really wild about this, that and I say this a lot, even from the most selfish position ever, and that's what you were kind of talking about, Meg, right? It would save money. It would save money, right? Like, it's not even just about,
right? Like, you want to be pragmatic? Give me $10 million and I will develop a program that will produce outcomes that will pay for itself inside of 2 years. And you can take that model and you could use it nationwide, and we could eradicate the problem, and we could have, everything works out better, but we don't do it. It's ridiculous.
This is why we can't negotiate. I was thinking to myself, because I was looking at anytime there is a, one of these articles about, we're a divided country. By the way, I hate that. It's fucking bullshit.
I fucking hate
We're not
that
a divided country. We're a country under attack by an internal enemy of white supremacy. Okay, that's what's going on here. Wealth and white supremacy. But, and this is why you can't negotiate, because you could say to them, hey, and actually, by the way, there have been pockets, like, for example, in Utah and some other states, they have figured out that giving people homes is cheaper than dealing with the social problems of homelessness.
Yes, all these things we know. We give someone a stable home, the outcomes are far better. We actually don't force them to stop using entirely. They're more likely to recover, right? Mm-hmm. You give them somewhere to live, you give them something to eat, and as long as they're able to come to the determination on their own, they get better.
It
That
goes
is
back
absolutely fascinating. Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
It goes back to the rat park analogy. Who's the researcher who developed that about addiction? It's a new model of addiction, basically, where they put rats into a bear cage, and they immediately would prefer the opium-laced water or whatever it is. But you put them into a social environment with lots of things to do and good food, and they don't even touch the opiate-laced water. So
Fascinating.
My bless your heart moment. The study that you're referencing is not well designed.
So that's wrong.
Yeah, it was a very sexy TED Talk.
I love to be corrected, though. I mean, that
Absolutely.
I learned something.
Sorry. Well, it's a pet peeve of mine because it really oversimplifies it, right? Addiction and dependence and suicidality occur with people who are well connected in social groups.
Interesting.
The source of addiction is almost entirely trauma.
Huh.
Now, does that mean once you've been traumatized and developed some sort of dependency that is a lifelong struggle? Absolutely not. Overwhelmingly, people who use and drink for periods, they use and drink problematically for periods, and most of them recover on their own without treatment. All the old adages about addiction and alcoholism really do need to be thrown out the window. They're inaccurate. The data does not bear that out. The once an addict, always an addict. It's just not true.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I wonder if we should segue into that discussion. I do, though. Before we do that, I want to go back, and it's because Meg, we talked earlier today, and you mentioned that you mentioned this documentary to me, right? This docudrama on Netflix, and I think it's really germane to what we're talking about in terms of the divide or the alleged divide in America, right? Because Sean, you said before the show, which I thought was really, really great. Oh, we were talking on the phone earlier, and you were saying that like back in the 90s, right? The whole thing was like, don't go to the comment section on the, don't go to the comment, avoid. And then now you're like, the entire internet is now the comment section. Like that
Right.
is what it is. This toxic brew of people protected by their computer screens and just spewing out complete nonsense. So anyway, Meg, maybe you want to just give us sort of a little bit of a gist of what that's about and sort of what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a marriage between my husband and me. My husband does machine learning, and he does it for marketing. So the reason you enjoy or want to buy what you want to buy when you want to buy it is probably because of him. And he scared me really early on with the capabilities that his industry and many others have to manipulate people. He had gotten to a point with Amazon with an algorithm he had designed that they could tell you with 98% certainty what you would put in your cart before you did it. Without you being on the page, you signed on to Amazon, they knew what you were leaving with. And this is where we come into questions of, does free will actually exist?
That's an interesting topic.
I would love to talk to you about that. I think I want to add something though about these algorithms, because I think these are very powerful technologies, and social media is a very powerful technology in and of itself, and something that has high value. And so it's like, to me, it's not the collection of data, it's not the algorithms, it's who is allowed to do what with them and who is in charge.
So that's actually what the I don't even know what it's, half documentary, half like live action something. What was it called?
It's called Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma. I have the article right here. I have not, by the way, seen the documentary. I just printed out this article before the show.
Same.
You will be as horrified as I've been since I've met my husband after you watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, it makes sense. Back in the 80s, we had 5 news stations. We probably had 3 local newspapers, and it was their job to keep our attention. But there wasn't that much noise, right? So as technology has advanced, the war for your attention has grown exponentially because you're not the commodity. Everybody says the data is the commodity, the data. Your attention is the commodity. So keeping you looking at things for as long as possible is the game. And that is so they can sell you things, that's so they can steer your decision making. What are some of the other things that they covered? There's just some crazy stuff because in order to get your attention, what do you think news has to do? I mean, you know this answer.
Yeah.
You've known it for years.
Yeah, sensationalism.
Sensationalism.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we stop having a middle because everything revolves around technology and everyone's trying to get everyone's attention. And we know the sexier the story, the more salacious, truth doesn't matter anymore because people, ethics, that's a topic for a whole other day.
Yeah.
Seriously, because this is what my husband did for years. And he asked me 2 years ago, he's like, the Scientologists have asked if I'd come do some work for them. And I'm like, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Oh,
talk about ethics. Talk about fucking ethics.
But it's hard because when they're like, but they're going to give me $2 million.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Right? So all of a sudden it's, and then you start to understand how good people slowly start moving towards really horrifying positions.
Right.
The people who surrounded Nixon were really ethical guys. They were known to be like stand-up guys, very ethical, but inch by inch, small decision by small decision, you find yourself one day, giving to charity and helping the old lady across the street and doing the right thing when nobody's watching. And a year later, you're chucking bottles at, protesters and showing up armed somewhere.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Shauna?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that this is, you do have to talk about free will and truth and all of those subjects to really get to the core of why this is a problem. Because I think that, not to disparage psychology at all, because I have a lot of respect for it, but in a sense, humans are not that difficult to figure out. Our motivations and our interests and things like that are not that difficult to figure out in terms of what we want. We want, yeah, exactly. Social credibility is a big one, and because social credibility helps with mating. And so, in terms of evolutionary psychology, it seems like it's group belonging, meaning, money, sex. Power, all those things are pretty basic. And so if you know that and you look at watch people's behavior, it's not that hard to predict what they're going to do next, what step they're going to take next.
Or want. Like since 2010, and this is in the documentary, I was shocked at this statistic. Girls between the ages of 13 and 15 saw a 160% increase in inpatient hospitalizations due to self-harm.
Wow.
That is astonishing statistic.
That is almost at the advent of Facebook.
Right. And Instagram and Instagram, all this stuff. Yep.
Right?
Is that based on fear of missing out, not measuring up, all those kinds of things?
Well, Instagram, I hate Instagram for this reason. It is horrible for your self-esteem. I say this day in and day out to patients. Stop comparing your insides to other people's outsides. Mm-hmm. And that is all Instagram is. Look at my fantastic life.
Yeah, it's so cool. I'm so cool. I do all these sexy things. I do all these trips. But that goes right to what you're talking about, Sean. That goes right to your topic, because we're talking about the desire to, and what you're talking about too, Meg. Right?
The beauty ideal, for example, is not. Mm-hmm. designed by Madison Avenue. The beauty ideal is designed by evolution, certain proportions, certain things like that. Now,
Sure.
Obviously, Madison Avenue has made everybody thinner, a little thinner, but the proportion of the hips to waist to bust ratio is for evolution is kind of set. And so, if you're comparing yourself to that,
I would argue that wealth has a lot to do with that as well. Different cultures, wealth, and being and having stature has a lot to do with whether you're tan or you're pale, whether you're thin or you're thicker. Depending on cultural context, bigger women are considered, to be very sexy,
right?
In some cultures, right? Like so, but thinness in this country means that you can control yourself. It means that you have access to a gym. It means all these implications that are associated with status.
And that seems to be the gist, right? And that's sort of what I think you were talking about too, Sean, is this sort of relentless, right? A relentless drive for status is sort of the motivating sort of thing behind everything everyone does, right? And you really have to be really self-reflective to even notice that.
But even if you take that, what is status? What does that serve?
Well, I think
status means more access to women, to sex, right? Security, so shelter, food, and that's really what we're still like our little reptilian brains are still controlling us, right?
Absolutely.
It's just gotten so much more complicated.
And so I would think that, given the technology that we have and given the wiring of the planet of the internet, I mean, what alternative really was there? I mean, the only thing I can say is accountability, right? Because, Mark Zuckerberg, we talk about him, being kind of a douche when he started Facebook. He started as a rating system for women, okay? So it evolved immediately into this status machine like you're talking about. And what else would it have done? How would you, Meg, have prevented this from happening if you had an opportunity to design an ideal system?
Oh, from behind the veil of ignorance.
We're pulling out some rawls.
Right.
That's the perfect way to design any system.
So what does that look like? What does that look like in terms of social media and how our system functions right now?
Well, if you took any of their engineers and you really do have to watch this because it goes into these are heavy hitters. These are the people who designed the like button, the people who designed strategy for building up membership in Facebook and various other major technology companies. They didn't know what they were doing at the time. They didn't realize that this is really what would come out of it. And then someone could take advantage totally legally of what they had made to hurt people, which is the interference into the elections and doing the micro-targeting of individuals where you can my husband can target you to the television in the room in your house that you're at and feed you stuff. And there's only a certain number of times that you have to hear those messages that they just sink in and you just accept them. They just become a part of your subconscious. So they're realizing this in retrospect, but a huge effort has to be put in to moderate, to not allow polarizing, to create algorithms that do not chase after 100% somebody's attention. But what that also means is that shareholders are going to have to be okay not constantly making more money.
That's a tall
tough.
order. It seems because what you're asking them to do, Claes, right now they're running the machine flat out, okay, and it's just as whatever can be done will be done. And now you're asking them to pull back. What's the incentive? Is it legal sanction? Do you break up Facebook? Do you what is it?
Well, there's short-term thinking, right? So we tend to think short-term. I mean, this administration it's a study in short-term thinking. But people tend to think short-term, right? They're thinking, but my shareholders. What they're not thinking is if we don't stop this, we may destroy our culture. We may destroy humanity. And I'm not talking 20 years down the line. I'm talking shortly. Because these tools are being used to destabilize all the major democracies in the world.
All of them.
Oh, yeah. All of them. Big time.
Because most people aren't aware of their own biases. They don't even understand what cognitive dissonance is. I tried to talk to my mom about it the other day. I'm like, I think the reason you like Trump is because you think you're a good person. And if Trump's a bad person, then that would make you a bad person.
Exactly.
Therefore, Trump's not a bad person.
Exactly. I think that's exactly the kind of reasoning. And I just want to jump in here really quickly. I think listening to what you're saying, Meg, and also listening to what I think Sean is getting at, and I tend to agree with it, is that it seems to me that the solution, there's two sort of solutions here. I think one, it has to be the force of law. You're not going to get people to do the right thing just because they want to, just because it's the right thing to do, for all the reasons we just talked about, right? Because of status and all that kind of stuff, and just the rat race of the trying to climb up that ladder is such that people will continue to do that unless they have a really strong sort of incentive not to, which is a legal incentive. I think the second piece, and this is what I think is most critical, and this is a lot of what I think we'd like to talk about in the next topic, and that is people understanding their biases, people understanding how they think, understanding evolutionary psychology and why we do what we do. And I try to hammer this all the time because it's so important. And this is a problem that pervades the right and the left. It is a human problem. And in terms of bridging the gap that we were talking about earlier in this show, the only way to do that is for everyone to understand that we are just meat machines walking around doing what we do, just like our cats and our dogs. We are just doing what we do. We're not special. There's no ghost riding around in the machine. We are just doing what we do. And we are literally, we are slaves to our cognitive biases. And then the people that prey precisely on those cognitive biases for money are deplorable, A. But B, this is where law has to come in and put up a dam.
And it's also why
that's possible. People can't grasp these things.
Well, this is why. Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to jump on here because it is why people who are religious hate evolution, because they don't want to see us as meat machines, and they don't want to see us as being able to have our strings pulled. And this is at the same time as the religious organizations and the religious right are pulling the strings.
But it's the same thing as people who believe in conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the same.
None of them want to believe. They cannot function knowing they have control over nothing. It is all meaningless, and there's nothing happening after you die. They can't handle that.
They can't. They literally cannot. Extinction anxiety, the fear of death, right? Fundamentally, right? Isn't that what drives this whole goddamn thing? If you really get that right, I think we're starting to get down to brass tacks here, which is great because we love doing that on the show, which is just like digging and digging and digging until we get to like the real fundamental stuff, right? Because we're talking about the drive for status, which ultimately is connected to the drive for survival, which is ultimately connected to a fear of death, right? And religion is built out of the fear of death. I mean, that is its whole promise. That's the whole promise of religion, right? Don't worry about dying. Don't worry about it. That obsession, that existential obsession that every human being has, it's fine. Don't worry. You'll be fine when you die.
I remember when I went through my serious phase where I struggled with my mortality as an atheist, and knowing what that really means. There was a solid, month-long period where I would weep. And I actually call myself the worst atheist in the world because you know when that stopped? Where I said, maybe I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Just the question, right? Just the hope the hope that there might be something more, that you might have something after this, that this might all not be for nothing. That hope right there is what people cling to. And that's the loophole, the giant door that the religious, or they just drive right in. They ride right in and
a loophole you could drive a truck through. That's a Seanism right there.
I say that too much.
Yeah, no, but I like it because it's so true. It's exactly right. I mean, it really fits certain situations, and particularly this one, which is you go back to that thing. It's like, oh, don't worry, there's no one can pull your strings. You have free will. You're an individual. All these things, but meanwhile, subscribing to the most string pulling sort of philosophy that there is, right? This idea that we need to act a certain way. We need to hate certain people, right? We need to exclude certain groups, all based on this idea of from authority, some old authority in a book, or like you said, Meg, conspiracy theories, which have in a lot of places are starting to take the place of some religions, right?
It's the same kind of psychological profile.
Mm-hmm.
People who are afraid and who cannot handle not being able to control what's happening. So if they feel they're in the know, that there's someone they can point to, that this is what's happening, it makes them feel better. That's basically conspiracy theorists.
Absolutely. And you know what? I can't blame them in some sense, right? I also want to feel better. So something that Sam Harris says from time to time, and I agree, despite my disagreements with Sam Harris on many other issues. But one thing that I think he gets really right is that we are in. Oh, no, I lost it. Ladies and gentlemen out there, I often lose my train of thought. I like to think it's because I'm so goddamn smart that the idea just flies through my head so quickly that I just can't keep up. But really, I just lose my train of thought sometimes, and that just happens. So let's just, I'm going to go ahead and just shut up now.
There's something someone said earlier that I wanted to talk about, and it's gone already. So,
well, I could try to tie this all together a little bit here, and that is that when we talk about this need to know, need to look forward to an afterlife, all of these things, and the need for status, all these things are feeding into hierarchy, into building hierarchy. And by the way, the same with the anti-democratic aspects of it. Like you say, we all agree that democracy is under siege. It's being destroyed, and it's being done consciously by the same forces who want to drive us back to feudalism, which is this pyramidal hierarchy with only a few people at the top, and is the absolute opposite. That is the opposite of democracy. So we're all talking about the same trends, the same overall forces in our world.
So the sad part about that is there is no solution to that. I spend a great deal of time talking about logical fallacies, cognitive biases, what they are, what in response to people's posts on Facebook. I'm like, okay, so what this is this is this is this, and it's people don't want to hear it.
It's just
it flies in the face of I am someone who's in control.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Stops it right there, right? If I'm telling you, you likely don't even have free will.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. You want
everything else.
It's like if there's I often talk about these bad ideas as munitions, because that's exactly what they are. But it goes a step beyond that, because these are munitions that people grab onto, and they hold the bomb inside themselves that is going to destroy them. They literally, they will hold on to these bad ideas for dear life, and then the bad ideas blow up and destroy their life or destroy their democracy or whatever.
This is actually a scalable thing. Individuals frequently, when they're afraid of something, like your greatest fear, they will bring it to them. They will create that very situation they fear the most, because the methods they use that they think will help them to avoid it actually make it more certain. Like an example, I'm afraid my husband's going to leave. So you get more controlling, right? So you get more clingy. So you're calling more. So you get suspicious. So you start doing these things that actually create the very situation you're trying to avoid.
That's fascinating.
Exactly the same way. Watch that in yourself. Everybody does it. I do it. I have to look at my biggest fears, right? My biggest fear is death. I am waiting for the singularity. I do not want to die. Download me. I'm cool.
Right.
Fair enough.
I'm right there with you.
I know.
I after reading the book and everything, I did for a while. I was kind of like, okay, I just have to live long enough to live forever. That's the thing. But I've kind of given up on that idea. I'm pretty sure I'm going to die. But at the same time, if something could come along and we could figure out a way to continue our experience, sign me up.
Oh my God, absolutely, sign me the fuck up. Sign me the fuck. Well, I'm an early adopter of technology ideas. Sign me the fuck up, I wanted to. I was thinking in connection to what we were just talking about, and in terms of solutions, right? And one thing that I keep coming back to in my own writing and my own thought about this issue, because I know all three of us are people who on this call are people who think deeply about things, who consider our part in things, who want to find things about self-actualization, right? And transcendence. How do you get to a place of essentially being happy, and not happy, joyous, and free and all that kind of stuff, running around with my shirt off or something like that. I mean, what I mean is just some sense of equanimity, just a sense of just being okay day in, day out without and I'm a person who struggled my entire life with depression, with drug addiction. I've been up and I've been down, I've been back, I've been forth. So this is stuff that's very salient to me, right? And I found the greatest peace that I've been able to find is in understanding my cognitive biases, and has been in realizing that I'm a meat machine, has been in looking at what death is in the face, right? And saying, holy shit, that is terrifying. Mm-hmm. But it also, listen to this, it also gives me a really intense appreciation for what I have right now, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'm able to live more presently. So I think the selling point is really in terms of a solution here is, are you happy or are you not? And most people are going to answer that question. If they're honest with themselves, they're going to say, actually, I am not really that happy. Yes, I have a nice job. Yes, I have I have a wife and I have a car, but there's an existential angst that I just sort of live with, and it's not great. And no matter what sort of thing I acquire, I don't get there. And I think this is how you get there. And I don't claim to be a guru or have this figured out. I mean, Sean and I have had our experience with gurus. Mm-hmm. I'm not calling myself a guru, but I just think that this is a way toward some level of equanimity.
So with one of the topics we were going to discuss, I actually found that the concepts used in the first 164 pages of the big book, there are several concepts in there that have shaped how I basically wear life like a loose garment. I mean, things don't stress me out. Bad things happen. We're back in court and custody, right? In the middle of the pandemic, that I had to go out and save all my patients, without any PPE. Really terrible things happen. But some of those lessons and the fundamentals are self-centeredness is the plague of the world, constant reflection on why you do what you do. And if you don't believe you have a problem, don't even bother working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I love that.
It goes along with stages of change, right? Which is it's a concept, it's a psychological concept that people move through change in various stages. And if you're in a pre-contemplation stage, you don't even think you have a problem, right? There's no problem at all. Pre-contemplation or contemplation, I have something going on, right? Then you move into action because you've determined you do, in fact, have a problem. And so now I got to do something about it. And then you go into maintenance, and then there's relapse. And it's not always necessary. But this is with all behavior and trying to change behavior. So we keep trying to give tasks, opportunities, have conversations with people who are in pre-contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
They're not ready to change. They haven't made that determination. So don't bother.
Well,
I will literally just let it go.
Well, and also those things, the denial of that there's a need to change is central to the core of their identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it comes to, America denying is basically in complete and total denial that it is a racist country or that it is a fascist country, but yet we announce that anti-fascism is anti-American, and we announce that anti-racism is anti-American. So what are we announcing? We're a racist and fascist country in denial.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right.
It was such a strange experience for me because amongst my peers or my contemporaries, I spend almost all of my time with people of color. Most of my friends, all my employees, 98% of them, everybody I treat, I felt like I had a really solid understanding of what the struggle is and all the myriad of different things that impact these communities and how it impacts them. And because of what I do for a living, I think deeply on that, right? And I think of like overwhelmingly all the different factors. And in the past, I will honestly say, in the past 4 months, I didn't think I could understand it any better, but I do. And I've gotten more and more angry. I've gotten more and more angry mainly because there are still people saying that this doesn't matter.
Ugh. Mm-hmm. Ugh. I just felt like a wave of emotion just sort of come over me just then, just because, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that just gets me fired the fuck up, right? Because it's that denial. And you know what's so frustrating and so exactly. What's so frustrating?
I have a news item when you're done.
Go for it.
No, you were saying.
I was just going to say, this week I posted on Instagram today, this week, about this experience I had being I played hockey for years and had some really racist experience playing hockey here in New Jersey over the last, but certainly, and it really kicked into high gear after 2016, such that by 2017 I'd quit playing hockey because I just didn't want to walk into hostile environments all the time, where I was literally being called names, being physically attacked on the ice. And look, I mean, yes, it's true that hockey is a violent sport, but not like this, not like deliberate elbows to the head during face-offs, right? Like
to say, oh, stop
it. Exactly. And so when people say that, and I'm like, or that this racism was so long ago, or slavery was so long ago, it is just so insulting. And like, I almost feel I can get and understand the racists because they're just delusional. But what really gets me is the people that are ostensibly my friends, right? People who are, or that I played with, teammates, right? Who they won't even talk to me about it. Let alone actually stick up for me. They don't even want to talk about race because they're so fragile. Talk about white fragility, so fragile. They can't even have a conversation about it, and it just kills me. It kills me because these are friends, right? These are people that I want to be close to. I want to play hockey with them, but I don't want to have to go walk back into that rink and know that I'm in it on my own. First of all, I cannot count on any protection, help. And B, why would I want to go back to a place where I have those kind of memories, right?
Well, as a therapist, I feel like you should be free to go wherever the hell you want.
Yes.
And why let them win? On the other hand, I have been in situations where I've genuinely asked questions, and this is a problem we have in discussing sensitive issues. I'm very well trained on how to ask questions in gentle, thoughtful ways. And merely asking a question has gotten me berated to the point. Simple question, right? I really honestly, genuinely want to know, at the beginning of all the new language around what's being called racist, what's racist, and how it's evolved, I said, are you doing a disservice by calling unconscious bias racism? Right? Like, because I feel like they're different terms. And this was way back. This was way back at the beginning. And I just wanted to understand. Right? I'm like, are we minimizing a word? Are we going to lose all meaning of that word? Does it mean anything? And I asked a genuine question. Do you think that it diminishes the strength of what racism is by applying it to unconscious bias? And it was an honest question. And I got torn a new asshole by probably 50 people. And then when I asked for a better understanding of how I had hurt people so that I could avoid it in the future, I got yelled at for demanding an answer from a person of color.
That's complicated. That gets really complicated really quickly.
There's a demand, but then there's a genuine conversation to be had.
Definitely.
I got that with just female stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
When men want me to explain what it feels like to have to work twice as hard in an environment, be twice as talented, and be discounted because I have breasts.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
For what it feels like to walk into a room and to be dismissed immediately, to be talked over constantly. I've had guys ask me to talk to them about this, and I'm like, just fucking do the work yourself.
Yeah,
right.
I got to jump in because I think what we're seeing here, and Christoph and I talked about this last week, about and the week before. We talk about racism every single week, but the tip of the iceberg is somebody using the N-word, but all this other stuff is much larger part of the iceberg. And what we're seeing is since Trump got elected, we're just seeing it's just an upwelling, an oozing, a volcanic kind of a slow volcanic eruption of crap, ever since Trump got elected, coming up from the subconscious or unconscious of the nation, of our history and our past. And it's like, and the thing is that the people who are most trying to put a lid on all this are the Christians, who they are desperate to be able to come up with some kind of narrative that does not have them at the center of racism in America.
So true.
They're desperate. And so this is a news article about this Pastor Rich Penkoski of Warriors for Christ DC chapter, and he filed a federal lawsuit against Black Lives Matter. And you ready for this? He actually accused Black Lives Matter of being a secular religion. And therefore, but they were putting a religious sentiment out into the public square, and and this is their fear. And actually, it really works well for us on the Radical Secular because we spend so much time talking about justice and racial justice that we do believe that is part of secularism. Okay, so this guy actually said what we believe is that saying that equality matters is really secular humanism, and he got it right. But he's trying to then twist the law to get his to get Christianity as I don't know if he believes it's the state religion or what he thinks it is, but it's so twisted. Anyway, I'm done.
It's the wolf in victim's clothing. Nothing enrages me more than the wolf in victim's clothing. Right?
Oh man, that might be a show title right there. I don't know.
Yes.
That's close, man. That's close to a show title right there. We're always looking for a show title as we go. So.
But that's that feeling when all of a sudden you have the right claiming that the left is hyper violent. I'm like, Are you insane?
Are you insane? Who's rolling into cities with pickup trucks and AR-15s? Come on!
You can't claim that someone's being violent when they're defending themselves against you.
Well,
I mean, what is this?
But it's infuriating, and they do it in all different ways. They don the cloak of a victim, and it makes me angry because I actually care about victims, and
Right,
victims.
actual victims.
Right,
Yeah.
actual victims. It's rage-inducing. It's absolutely rage-inducing.
We spend all this time on the show talking about the just world fallacy, which is really another word for victim blaming, and so they also reverse victim and oppressor. That's their constant, so it is just they have got the perfect mind fuck. I don't know how else to describe it.
Oh no, we're in what would be a toxic relationship. This is what it would feel like if you were in a relationship with a very damaged person, and just scale it. That's all.
That's fascinating.
All the same things. You can watch the abuse cycle, right? Like, he does the shitty thing, he does the nice thing, there's a period of rest for a little while, then another shitty thing happens, then he does a nice thing, and this cycle just keeps on continuing. And I actually have a theory where the people who continue to support him and think he's a wonderful person have horrific relationships.
Mm-hmm.
This seems normal.
That's that, right. Yeah. You know what? That's really interesting that you brought that up, because we talked about last week about some racist sheriff out in Arkansas who berated his girlfriend for talking within like the most, N-word. She was speaking to a black clerk at the supermarket, and he, in the parking lot, she recorded it, thankfully, lost it. And again, this guy is, a racist, obviously, also a racist with a lot of power, and no doubt a Trump supporter. And this is what his relationship looks like. Right?
So Trump's behavior is fine.
Exactly.
Right? It's normal.
Normal, of course, right? This is how real men act, right? This is how real men are.
Those men, women who've been with those men, oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm used to that.
Yep.
That's how it goes.
You know what's really interesting too? I wonder, and I'm just taking the analogy, maybe I'm straining the analogy a little bit here, but I wonder too, how is the Democratic Party and Democrats in America, the left in America, also in an abusive relationship with the Republican Party, right? Because the left continues to think that the Republican Party, up until very recently, but the left continues to think that the Republican Party is acting in good faith, right? That the Republican Party really has the same goals as we have talked about
Both
here,
sides.
which is reducing human suffering with what's best for all Americans. And that is demonstrably not true anymore. If it ever was, it certainly isn't now. But still, you have these folks on the left coming in and saying, "Oh no, we have to understand. Oh no, we have to negotiate. Oh no," and it's like, it sounds to me like an abusive relationship, frankly.
So if you're actually trying to resolve conflict, it's not helpful to say, "We all know you're a dick and you should." Right? So one-on-one, you want to resolve the conflict. You want to bring people closer together. You want to create space for more moderate Republicans. Welcome everybody back in. You can't vilify them. You can't. If there's any hope of anybody working together into the future. Because once they do that, once the Republicans are evil, horrible, 100%, there is not going to be any cover for any Democrat ever in the future working with one in any capacity.
It's tough. We can't negotiate with it. You can't negotiate. It's a tough balance to strike. Go ahead, Sean. I know you have something to say on this.
I was just going to say, but they are fucking dicks. They are evil. There is, they are. There's no compromise. Because of what we talked about earlier, they're not interested in better education or solving the addiction problem or helping people.
They say they are, but
Right.
their actions say different.
So what's your psychological
education? They want to address this opioid crisis, right? They want to solve it.
Please,
they care about education and children.
Yeah,
absolutely. We're just not going to give them any money.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so as I was going to say, Betsy DeVos, fuck you, you know.
Fuck. Oh my God. Fuck you, Betsy DeVos. If you're listening to this, go fuck yourself. And no one else will.
How do you wake up in the morning?
Oh, how do you live with yourself?
Look in the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so from a psychological standpoint, what's the solution? How do you stop the gaslighting? How do you, if you do want, like, say you believe in this whole divided country narrative that we can actually all get together and sing Kumbaya and get back together, how do you do that?
So, the second you feel you're being gaslit, which is almost all day, every day.
I know.
You absolutely stop giving credence to wherever that information is coming from. You stand strong in your position and know you are not crazy. You can still critically assess information, but when you start questioning whether or not you're sane, stop. You are not insane. Just stop that thinking in its tracks. Moving forward, there is going to be, and I fear for this for both of my parents. My father last year had a long conversation with me where he believes he is a white nationalist.
Wow.
Father. And started walking down, IQ scores and blah, blah, blah. I was like,
I've heard it all.
But there are epigenetic factors associated with that. And all those studies have been thoroughly torn apart. There's regional differences there. Don't even get me started on IQ tests. But I walk down logically, rationally, and as a professional in this field with my father, who is still a member of the bar in good standing in New York and New Jersey, argued in front of the Supreme Court. Brilliant man. It's not going to be reason and rationality. Mm-hmm. So when I have to bring someone, frequently I have patients in front of me, and it's not in their best interest to be honest with me, to develop a bond with me, to trust me. I have to validate their feelings. As much as I may hate them, I step in and I'm like, this sucks. Yes, this sucks. It feels shitty. This whole thing feels shitty. This sucks. You may not even be an addict. I'm not here to tell you you're an addict. You think about what their fears are, and you validate that. Not the behavior, but the fear. I know you're afraid that your kids aren't going to have a future, right? Like when you're in a trailer park and all you've got is white, you're terrified that like the only thing that your kids have is going to be now seen as bad. They're not even thinking about how it affects communities of color. They're not. They're thinking of themselves, and they're driven by fear. Republicans, this has been gone over in the literature.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and they've trumped up this idea of white genocide, that even the intermarriage with people of color is the dilution and the destruction of the white race. So there's nowhere for them to go. There's literally nowhere because we all have a little bit of DNA from Africa in us, or a lot. And that brings up that story of that firefighter who was like, he took a DNA test and he was like 17% black. And, you heard that story, right? And he was ostracized. All of a sudden, as soon as everybody found out that he had 17% black, the other white guys who probably also had 17% black, were harassing him, and he actually won a lawsuit and he won damages because of that. So yeah.
This involved them on Christmas time hanging a noose on the as an ornament to put things in perspective.
With that's saying where 17% on the 17%.
Just to put things in perspective, what we're talking about here.
That isolated, that things like that are just so shocking to us. I mean, I'm all over the place. I know people all over the world. It's horrifying. Where is it not horrifying?
I know exactly. Yeah. Where is it that like, right? And I talk about this a lot in my writing and online, and that is if you get a group of men together, particularly white men, but men together, typically it devolves into toxicity very, very quickly. So frats are an obvious example, right? Old boys, they're like just disgusting. And then also, wealthy groups of people at the top of corporations, which are usually men, right? Top of law firms, top of financial firms, right? Like once you have that sort of little boys club, things get toxic so fast. And I can imagine, I'm not an expert. I always do disclaimers on this show. Yeah. I don't know anything about firefighters, but I do know something about when men get together. And I think that I played on hockey teams, right? I know exactly what happens when men get together, and the misogyny comes out, the homophobia comes out, and the racism comes out.
So I think we had touched on this not too long ago, that people go from being good people to engaging in bad acts in inches. Right. And with particular acts, it has a outsized impact. That first step into violence that you act out upon, which is not in defense of yourself or somebody else, that's a huge shift, right? That first time you take advantage of a woman in some way, shape, or form, even if it's smacking an ass, making a comment about a woman on the street. Once that line is crossed, that's a big one. And then the cohort is supportive of these things.
Right.
So you no longer feel bad.
Exactly.
I have a question that this brings up, okay? And I've heard both sides of this, and I don't really know, not being an expert. What is the validity of the Stanford prison experiment and the Milgram experiment?
So the Stanford prison experiment would never, ever, ever have been done again, because it was horrifically traumatizing to everybody involved. But recent research has actually shown that that is not the case. They found more ethical ways of designing the research, and that is not necessarily true, that people will take on kind of a Lord of the Flies sort of approach if given the opportunity. And actually, along with that, the real Lord of the Flies kids, there was a group of about 15 Australian boys who were trapped on an island for a year. They all survived. They learned to hunt. They didn't kill each other. It's like the opposite of Lord of the Flies.
So how do you square that then? Okay, so you've got the real world situation where you see this escalation of compromise, ethical compromises, and then violence, and then heinous things like genocide going all the way on up the ladder. How do you square that with the other observation of cooperation and pro-social behavior?
It's a great question.
Cognitive dissonance. Have you read Mistakes Were Made?
Oh, I have.
Yes,
I have. We've talked about that. And that I actually read that, Sean, because you suggested it. And then Meg and I later talked about it because that was one of the most important books I've read ever, frankly.
We just did a podcast and I tagged you on it. I was like, you're going to want to listen.
Yeah, I remember. Yes, I remember.
I stand her so hard. Oh my God, I love her.
Yeah,
I used to be involved in a group which is called Scientific Skepticism, which is a terrible name. But basically, it is a group of people who are actively fighting against kind of like wellness bullshit and,
conspirituality,
the pseudoscience, the gurus, the cults, the, cupping, and homeopathy.
Oh, the cupping, the fucking cupping. Like, what the fuck? Who even comes up with this stuff?
I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, but it's like you just got in a fight with like a fucking octopus. Like, what the fuck is that?
It doesn't even
and then went to do the Olympics for some reason.
It's because smart people can be told to do stupid things because they give people authority who shouldn't have authority. Libertarians rail against people having licenses or requiring to be licensed. But let me tell you, I've known many a life coach who is responsible for a completed suicide because they had no business doing what they were doing. And they can't lose their license because they don't
have one. They don't fucking have one.
And here's the thing. Every libertarian wants a licensed architect to design their house. They want a licensed, they want a doctor with a license when they go to the hospital. They want, come on.
Right. It's so true. You know what? I want to, but we're running short on time, but I do want to touch on this briefly because something you just brought up, Meg, reminded me, we were talking about licenses, and Alcoholics Anonymous is famous. It's actually famous in terms of, right, because the whole sponsor-sponsee model is that basically if you are sober, you are competent to help somebody get sober. And maybe there's an argument for that, but then there's also a further argument that you are somehow like able to help them with their psychological problems. And so I think you should talk about this, Meg, because I know this is obviously your area of expertise, but I think this is one of the, and again, I want to use a little disclaimer here because I think there are some people here that are in AA probably that listen to the show. I have been in AA, by the way, for a long, long time ago for a period of time. So Meg and I have that in common. So I'm not here to disparage Alcoholics Anonymous. If that works for you, that's great. I'm just, but so that's my preface before we sort of kick off this short discussion because we are running low on time.
I come from a unique place where I was in AA when I was 19 years old. And I left AA when I was 33. So my 20s were spent in it. And the structure that most people are familiar with, people go to meetings, you talk about what's going on, there are steps somehow involved, and you have a sponsor who's there to talk to you about things. Now, the actual intent of the framework of AA is that the groups were there to discuss the progress of the individuals as they go through their step work, the 12 steps. And there are very specific instructions on how those steps you're supposed to go through them. And your guide is supposed to be your sponsor. So the person who is in charge of basically teaching you how to do this is your sponsor. Chris and I went through a fairly unique subset of AA, which is considered the most hardcore, right? Like we did it the exact way that the original, that they did way back in 1933, spoke all over the country about it, had tapes of me speaking. I was in. I was fully in, and it was extra culty. It took me moving away from it to recognize how bad it really was. I did not know how to socially function at 33. Because the years where you learn to talk to people about normal things and not about, AA lingo and meetings and conferences, I miss those years. So there are a lot of culty aspects, but one of the things after going into graduate school after this and really studying cognitive behavioral therapy and many other types of therapy, I wanted to understand why the specific brand that I'm so used to calling you Chris. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Krista, that we went through, why it did actually have a much better success rate than AA as a whole. I mean, it was exponentially better. The people who went through the process the way we did, most of them, if not all of them, except for us, are still so.
I'm sorry, I had to laugh at that one. Everyone knows that I love my Negronis, and I sure do love them.
Dude, big fan. But the funny thing is I found out when I left, I'll tell you that, that's another funny story, but with my clinical training, I looked at what are called the first 164 pages of the Big Book, which was written by Bill Wilson, and it describes the steps he took and how he maintained his sobriety. And as I took a look at each of those steps, I realized that they were a combination of motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, really tried and true. If somebody who was a skilled clinician used these techniques, changed the wording around, they would probably have the same outcome. So that blew my mind. And so I really think that the low success rate, the failures in various capacities of AA as a whole is really the result of having a non-professional give treatment, basically, for a behavioral health problem.
That's really fascinating.
I've been talking about writing a book about this for years.
If you ever want a co-writer, let me know. I want to point this out too, Meg, because because first of all, thank you so much for that description of it, and I think it's a really great way to loop this into the show that we're talking about here. Is that, you know, I left A long time ago now, and I spent my college years basically sober, which is an interesting time to spend sober. And I know you did too. But so I bring this up because there are a lot of things I thought AA did wrong in retrospect, but the one thing, and we talked about this, Meg, the thing that it got right was self-reflection. The idea of looking at oneself, and this is the big book this is the big book way of doing it, right? Those first 164 pages, it's all, those steps are all about looking at oneself.
Yeah, it's
honestly,
you are
and
selfish. You are selfish.
Exactly. Adding you're selfish, like realizing who you are essentially as a human being, like what it is to be a human being. Now, again, I don't really subscribe to what some of their solutions were, like prayer and meditate. I mean, I actually am a meditator, but not because I think there's solutions to this.
That's learning that you're not in control. So all the focus on religion is really teaching how to let go of control.
And I have some mixed feelings about that too, right? Because and this goes to the sort of the self-actualization piece of taking ownership of one's life, as opposed to as saying that one is, there's nothing I can do about it. And there's a line to be walked there, I think, between that and on the other hand, saying that like, I have no control over my life, or I am really truly in control of what happens in my life every day. Because there's something in the middle there.
The happy medium is the control that I have, and I have absolute control over it, is this, right? Mm-hmm. My behaviors, sometimes my thoughts, actions, that's what I can control. I can control those things to affect the change I want. Whether that change happens, I cannot control. So the religious piece of AA really speaks to understanding where the limits of your control are, so that when you reach them, you can just stop fighting.
I think that's really important, and we should probably wrap it up just because we're getting toward the end of time, and I think this is a really interesting sort of way to end the show, and that is. Right, because I think one of the things we talked a lot about today is our solutions, right, to these, the divide, quote unquote, to the extent that exists, and also solutions to sort of the existential problems or the problems that are fundamental to being a human being, which is self-centeredness and selfishness, right, that drive, and also and the lust for status, and I think that one of the things that AA is good for, and one need not be an AA to learn this sort of stuff, right? But like the idea of thinking critically about oneself, thinking critically about one's beliefs, questioning, why am I doing this? Why am I thinking this way? And now I'm now going to just sort of leave it over to Meg to do your final thoughts, and then Sean, do your final thoughts.
So my truth, after thinking a lot, which I'm sure we all do, about the ills of the world and solutions for everything, every time I come up with a solution, whether it's at a micro level or a macro level, it really involves actively working towards a state of being totally selfless and knowing you're never going to get there. If an organization actively works towards helping others, really focuses on that. If an individual, I focus on that all the time. I'm like, I want to have as little self-centeredness in me as possible. I'm never going to be free of it. I feel good helping people who need help. I get something out of it. But as long as it's something that I continuously strive to do, I will always be a better person, and I will always have better outcomes. I had another one, but it went away.
We lose trains of thought on this show. It's a big part of the show. It's like
hours.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Sean, go ahead.
Well, it's been really just interesting watching the two of you talk about your experiences in AA, because I've never really been to AA, but I have when I was doing a little bit of research for the book that I keep threatening to write, but probably never will. But I read the big book because I wanted to understand all this, because I have a chapter on addiction, and I find that it's interesting that they stumbled into this cognitive behavioral therapy sort of modality while basically making the whole thing about religion, because that really is the entire big book when you look at it. It's all about his finding something greater than himself. And the other thing that I really object to about AA is the idea that if you get better, then it's because of AA, but if you fail, it's your own fault. And it's really
another one. The way I'm probably sure that Christoph and Mio talked about, we weren't actually real alcoholics. Because when we
oh yeah, exactly. That's why it didn't work for us. We weren't real alcoholics. Like what?
I've been
like
told that. I was told that.
Just like talking in circles. It's like, come on.
Yeah. So
they're happy. They weren't real alcoholics.
Exactly. They never had a problem in the first place. It's not that we found a way to live, right? Yeah. It couldn't possibly be that.
You were just posers as alcoholics, basically.
Exactly. We were just posers. We didn't really have a problem, and therefore the fact that now we drink successfully means that does not invalidate the argument, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, so and I think the very, very best skewering of AA that I've ever seen is the Doug Stanhope routine, which everybody should watch if you haven't. It's an amazing 5-minute routine. Oh, it's absolutely well worth watching. I mean, he talks about there's a whole Gary Busey joke in there. It's great. Anyway, but and then a final thought about what you said about selflessness, and that is I go back to Dawkins and reciprocal altruism, because I do think that human morality is all based around reciprocity, right? And altruism, helping others, not only makes you happy, but it also raises your social standing. So it's just a better way to live. And that's
right.
Yeah.
It's an evolutionary benefit. It keeps us together. It keeps us alive. It keeps us functional. All this antisocial behavior, people not calling it out, basically relegating altruism to religion and poor human service workers, right? That's it. Well, those people are responsible for being good. The rest of us, nah.
Exactly. And that reciprocal altruism piece is so critical. I'm so glad you brought that up, Sean.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks. This has been a really, really great conversation. I mean, I think we hit a lot of different topics, probably went a little bit longer than we normally do, but I think that's perfectly fine. I think we had a good conversation. So, before we go, I want to once again remind everybody to make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I want to make sure that you, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button. That really matters. Give us a thumbs up, give us a clap, give us all that kind of positive sort of feedback, because that stuff really does matter for us as well. And please check out the Just Word Fallacy Medium project. We are, again, posting new stuff every week on Thursdays. And if you want to write and be part of that, please write us at The Radical Secular. And look, thanks everyone for being here. And thanks especially Meg for our guest for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
Oh, yeah.